What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines. Available for download on all major digital platforms. The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined with Professor Stephen Brady, who is the Chair of Philosophy at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Now, his earliest research was in logic and the philosophies of language and time. He then moved on to the philosophies of the mind and of science, focusing especially on the evidence for psychic research and psychic phenomena in the hope that it would provide new insights into traditional philosophy problems. He also turned his attention to hypnosis and multiple personality. Stephen Brady, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you being here today. It's 10 o'clock in Vegas, where you are. Are you close to the Strip? Whereabouts are you in Vegas?
Well, I don't know if this would mean much to your watchers or listeners, but about 15 minutes from the Strip.
Wow, 15 minutes from the Strip. That's pretty cool. But you know, I've spent some time in Vegas before, and there's some beautiful places, you know, away from the Strip. Some beautiful places to eat and to go to. Yeah. Wow, this is going to be interesting. You've lived an interesting life. You really have. And this, from the research that I've done on you, this all sort of started when you was playing the table game. Is that right?
I was back in graduate school. It was a slow day in Northampton, Massachusetts, and I was busy working on a dissertation on temporal logic. I knew nothing about parapsychology. A couple friends came over. We'd seen the only movie in town, and they suggested we play a game they called Table Up. They meant let's have a seance, but they knew about as much about parapsychology as I did. All they knew is that this was a fun thing to do, and it worked sometimes. And so for 3 hours, I watched my table rise in the air and spell out answers in response to questions. It was my table. It was my house. It was broad daylight. Plenty of opportunities to examine the table while all this was happening. It convinced me at the time.
I bet it did. But it wasn't until you was a bit older where you sort of revisited this, was it?
Well, I was either smart or cowardly enough at the time to realize I couldn't really talk about this with my mentors. And I didn't want to sabotage what looked like a promising start to an academic career. So I waited till I finished my PhD, got a job, published what I still think is pretty reasonable and respectable stuff in mainstream philosophy of time and logic, and got tenure. And then with the academic freedom that that's at least supposed to guarantee, I remembered what happened to me back in grad school, and I figured if I was a responsible academic, I really needed to come to grips with this. I knew that some major philosophers had tackled the evidence in parapsychology, and I read what they had to say and decided there was something worth sinking my teeth into.
Had you had any sort of experiences when you were younger as well, in a sense that you couldn't explain? I mean, was there anything?
Not really. I mean, I was interested in psi research back when I was quite young. There was a TV show in the US called, I think it was One Step Beyond. It allegedly dramatized cases from the files of the Society for Psychical Research. And I remember thinking when I was a kid, it would be very neat when I grew older to be a psychical researcher. But I put that out of mind, when puberty struck. And didn't really think about that again until decades later.
Yeah, it's been an interesting path for yourself. It really has. Oh gosh, with so many directions we're going to take this in, and we've only got 51 minutes, so we've got a lot to talk about, I guess. Now, for some people, if you can't see it, it means it's not real. It's not there.
Right. But in parapsychology, you can see it. I mean, if a table levitates, that's pretty tangible.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But there are things that we can't see, that there does seem to be something that science is now saying is there, especially with things like dark matter.
Well, scientific hypothesizing is a tricky business, especially when it deals with unobservables. But, we can evaluate scientific hypotheses by a variety of means, including their predictive utility. So even if the entities that science posits are still largely theoretical, they may have considerable predictive utility until something better comes along. In the case of psychic functioning, we're dealing with a rather different sort of phenomenon, because we don't have much predictive utility in the case of psi.
No, absolutely not. Now, I'm sure that I've had someone on that touched on parapsychology in a sense, research, and I think that he had brushed shoulders as well with the Edgar Cayce Foundation, the ARE.
Mm-hmm.
Have you studied much in the sense of metaphysical subjects like Edgar Cayce or other such?
Well, I haven't studied Cayce in great detail, although that's certainly one of the interesting cases in parapsychology. But I'm a philosopher, so I've thought a lot about the metaphysics of parapsychology.
Absolutely. I suppose as well, what would you say to fellow colleagues who are, quite atheist in the sense of some of the subjects we're going to touch? I mean, what do you think they're missing?
The evidence, probably. One of the things that I've learned is that people have very firm opinions about the reality or non-reality of psychic functioning, but when you poke them a little bit, you find out they don't really know what the evidence is. And I found that even in the case of many parapsychologists who were very quick to dismiss the evidence for large-scale psychokinesis, for example, and really were just taking the word of other people who didn't know what that evidence was themselves. So when I started studying the evidence directly, I was bowled over by how good it was. And I was shocked to find how little parapsychologists with firm opinions on the matter actually knew about it.
Yes, but then that, it's mainly the case, isn't it, I suppose, with them as well, is don't show me the evidence, my mind's already made up.
There's quite a lot of that both in and out of parapsychology, that's true.
Okay, now, some of the, I was going to say there, some of the most interesting cases you've come across, is that a good place to start, do you think, with your work?
Sure, why not? Probably the most interesting case I personally investigated is one I call the case of the gold leaf lady. This is a woman from Florida whose body would break out spontaneously and instantaneously in a kind of golden colored foil. And this would happen right before my eyes. It's clear that she wasn't doing a magic trick. I've even had magicians there to see if the foil could be hidden and manipulated. Actually, it's very difficult to do. And besides, there was no place in the best of these incidents where she could have hidden any foil. So if I was sitting across from her at dinner, I could see something appear spontaneously on her face. It was clear that she didn't put her hand up there ahead of time to place it there. It just appeared.
Do you think we're going to touch on some other cases as well? And of course, that case you're talking about comes from the Golden Leaf and other parapsychological investigations, which is your book from 2014, I believe. Is that right?
I think that's more like 2007.
Is it 2007?
Yes.
Well, maybe the Kindle version came out a lot later then.
That could be.
It could. That's probably what it is. Do you think a lot of, well, not a lot of it, all of this is pointing to consciousness, would you say? All of what you've studied points to in that one direction?
Well, yeah, in different ways. I mean, the thing about the Gold Leaf Lady is that it's very similar to poltergeist cases. So perhaps you and your viewers and listeners know that the received view about what happens in poltergeist cases is that there is a living person, a so-called poltergeist agent, usually a teenager or adolescent, somebody with serious emotional issues, but no conventional way to express their conflicted feelings. So it's as if the subject in a poltergeist case has all these intense feelings, has no way to get them out, and it's as if it's a kind of brute psychic flailing about. The subject has these feelings and then goes woof, and things fly around or burst into flame or rearrange themselves and so on. Now, of course, I mean, one of the reasons we know that there's a poltergeist agent is that often when the subject moves to another location, the phenomena follow. And it's not just teenagers or adolescents who have serious emotional problems. Marriages are a very fertile ground for that as well.
Yeah.
And Katie, the Gold Leaf Lady, is somebody who didn't exhibit any of her many psychic abilities until she married her current and second husband, which by all accounts is a very difficult relationship. And her phenomena began with things like poltergeist phenomena, objects rearranging themselves in the house, appearing and disappearing. And the story goes like this. One day, a carving set appeared out of nowhere. And her husband said to her, well, what good is it if it isn't money? And then 2 days later, Katie's body started to break out in this kind of golden foil. So if you want my pop psychological analysis of this, it would be that symbolically, the golden foil satisfies Katie's husband's demand for something valuable. But Katie doesn't really have to bear the responsibility of being the goose that laid the golden egg, which I think is a very heavy responsibility. And even more interestingly, I think, it's a way for her to express her considerable rage against her husband. So she feels, I think, trapped in the marriage in lots of ways. And this is a way of not really giving her husband what he wants. He wants something valuable, and she's giving him fool's gold. So it's a way of giving her husband the psychic finger.
But do you think there's those cases in poltergeist activity where there is seemingly an attachment from something that has crossed over that is attached for whatever reason, and things are happening which cannot be explained except that it is a paranormal phenomena in a sense?
Well, yes, except in poltergeist cases, I think we eliminate the idea that it's the phenomena being caused by someone who's crossed over, someone who's dead. So that's the difference between poltergeist and haunting cases, or one difference. Haunting cases, we say, are place-centered. The phenomena are attached to a location. In poltergeist cases, they're attached to a living person.
Yeah.
And it seems that the phenomena are tied to the living person's psychology. And another reason we know that is that when the inner conflicts of the agent are resolved, the phenomena disappear.
Yeah, so really, our understanding of this phenomena is still very limited. I mean, others would say you know, that's, and maybe as I've just said, that's an attached entity that's wanting to harm or is angry and is, you know, has come attachment due to age or due to something in that house, or, you know, whatever it may be. It's not just the age, of course, but, you know, really maybe even that understanding isn't really what it's about at all. Maybe it's even a much bigger issue, not issue, but a bigger, what's the right word for it really? We have no framework for it. I suppose that's what I'm saying. We don't understand it. We've called it something when it actually isn't.
Well, I think we do have a framework for it. It's in terms of the living person psychology. So what it does is to expand our understanding of the stage of operation of our minds. So, look, let me put it this way. Psychokinesis is very scary, I think. And one reason it's scary is that if we take the existence of any psychokinesis seriously, even if it's the moving of a pencil by thought alone, just a little bit, if we think that's possible, it's a very small step conceptually from making a pencil move to making somebody drop dead by thought alone. So the existence of any psychokinesis at all forces us to take seriously a kind of magical worldview, which most of us associate, usually condescendingly, only with so-called primitive cultures. So it's a worldview where thoughts can have all sorts of lethal or malevolent consequences, and where we might have to take responsibility for a range of things we'd just as soon be bystanders for. You know, in developed countries, not too many people are comfortable with the idea that if we have a nasty thought about somebody and that person has an accident, that we might have had something to do with it. But I think that's part of the payoff of poltergeist cases. It shows us that maybe this is really the way the world works, and that people in undeveloped countries are much closer to having an accurate sense of causality than modern science does.
Well, maybe with the poltergeist activity as well, there's nothing that's going to be attached to you unless you give the free will to allow it to be. Maybe there's something in you that allows that attachment to happen, if there is that type of activity, as I'm trying to explain, it even exists. Before we touched on the poltergeist subject, you know, I did mention the word consciousness. Do you think that being the self-awareness that I've got and you've got, where we both look in the mirror and we can reflect on our reflection, and we can be self-aware on our reflection, is that part of the brain, or is that something outside of the brain, like a soul, in your opinion?
I haven't worked that one out for myself. I think the only thing that would give us conclusive evidence one way or the other about that would be conclusive evidence for survival of bodily death. I don't think we're going to solve that just by philosophical reflection on non-survival cases.
See, I don't feel like... Yeah, I was just reflecting earlier on. I was just thinking to myself, if my consciousness is inside my brain, I don't feel as though I'm inside my head. When I look out at the sky, or even at you right now, it's undescribable, really, isn't it? But it feels greater than me, and it's almost... I'm okay with the idea that, you know, if I was to be... If I die tomorrow, you know, that's it, because I wouldn't know the difference anyway. But it just seems to be my truth only, that there is something bigger, that my consciousness did not come from just my father and mother having sex and creating me. That, you know, to me, it just feels that potentially, maybe I've always been, I just don't know. I'm just not aware at this level right now that I'm eternal.
Well, it's an experience that you share with a great portion of humanity. And even people who don't go quite that far, they would agree with you that we're something other than just the gray matter inside us, whether it's eternal or not. But again, the only way we'll ever be sure, I suppose, is when we find out that we haven't died with the death and dissolution of our body.
Absolutely. Well, what about people and doctors as well, surgeons nowadays, as you know, having near-death experiences, yet being complete atheists prior, yet afterwards having a life-changing and bringing through life-changing knowledge in a sense of, family members that they didn't know they had, yet after the near-death experience and they go to speak to the family about them, yes, they did. They never knew these facts before. I'm referring to Ibn Alexander, I think, who I'm hoping to get on one day, and others as well. There's been others, lots of evidence that have come through. What is this telling us? From your perspective as well.
Well, what it's telling me is that they're certainly having psychic experiences. They haven't died because they've been resuscitated. So. Part of the problem of dealing with near-death experiences is the problem of what many call time stamping, the idea of determining exactly when these experiences that they later report actually occurred. We have no way of being absolutely certain that they occurred when the patients met the criteria for bodily death. So we don't really know exactly what's going on in those cases. I don't think they come back necessarily with knowledge that their loved ones, their deceased loved ones, have survived. They come back with very powerful experiences, but interpreting them, I think, is still very tricky.
Well, yeah, they get to meet those who have crossed over, that were close to them, most times close to them. They get to meet them and, rest assured that they're okay, and, that their work on Earth is very much, to go back, and it's important to bring this message back because certain people in the world over time it will always affect and give them hope that they need at that moment, that this is, or a remembrance that their consciousness continues, and it always has done. The thing is, will we ever in humanity's time span ever get to the bottom of it? This is a question that's been going since the dawn of consciousness, probably.
I think it's going to be very difficult. When I wrote my book on survival of bodily death called Immortal Remains, my goal was to have a really clear answer to that question by the time I was done. And what I ended up with was a position I hadn't counted on. I don't know why people write books. I write books to figure out what my views are, because only when I've gone into it in that kind of detail am I ready to go public with what I think is the case. Yep. And what I feel I personally learned from that exercise was that it's actually very difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish evidence for genuine survival of bodily death from evidence of really interesting psychic functioning among the living that simulates the evidence for survival of bodily death. And although I think the scale tilts slightly in the direction of survival, I think it's almost impossible to reach a slam dunk conclusion about that.
Do you think it wants to be found?
I don't know. I know that we want to find it. It's a question of great personal interest to just about everyone.
Yeah.
But I think we may just have to learn to be patient.
What if consciousness as the primeness, I-ness, the pure essence, the God, if you want to call it that, even though that word is dog spelled backwards, it's just a word, but this isness of this consciousness that we are, really we're here having an experience because we chose to have this experience, and it is a little bit of a test that we set ourselves, and there's no way to cheat the test because there's no way to really get to the bottom of it until we've crossed over. Otherwise, the experience we're having now would be not as valid as it would be, before we came here.
Yeah, it's one of the great mysteries of life and death, I guess.
So, okay. And I think, I think that the process of getting people like yourselves on, which is so important, I find fascinating, is that it's a key, isn't it? It's a carrot in a sense. It's all the truth that you've gone through in your life to get to this point where you are now, and it's a personal journey as well, isn't it?
Yes. In part, it's a way of reflecting on the way in which I interact with the world at large. Because if I'm right that it's possible and maybe even probable that evidence for post-mortem survival is really just evidence of psychic functioning among the living, it suggests another way in which our minds connect intimately and extensively with the minds of others and with the physical world. And it shows that there's a kind of connectedness between all minds, which, even if there isn't an eternal soul, shows that life among the living is really much more interesting and complex than many of us credit it to be.
Absolutely. You know, as much as all this work you've done, and we will get into some of it, I'm sorry just to keep you in this part of it, but for all the work you've done, which looks at evidence of existence beyond this understanding, isn't it just so important, this life right now? If we did choose to come here, I could use the word very about 20,000 times or more, how very important it was for us to be here now and to have this experience that we're having.
I'm not sure I understood that comment. I mean, what do you mean if we choose to?
Well, if we've chosen to come here, then being here is just so important, and really trying to prove the existence of life, you know, the continuation of the soul. Why are we desperate to prove it? I know it's helpful in the sense that, you know, we know that this personality that we've built took so long to build up, and all these issues that we've gone through will not just be for nothing. But what is it that's so grasping for us to really figure this out, if it takes us away from the current moment now, which is all we have right now?
Well, but I think you did put your finger on it. We don't want to feel that our lives are for nothing, that, you know, we've striven to be good people, we've striven to produce works of some value, and then poof, we're gone. I think we'd like to feel that there's something more to our legacy and to our lives than the mere concrete things that we've left behind, you know, whether it's our works or our children or something like that. So it really does put our lives in some kind of larger context, and it's completely understandable that we want to know what that context is.
Do you know why I do this for as well? Is I love these subjects for in the sense of what can we bring from the knowledge of for example, your work, and bring it into the moment now. What healing properties could we bring in from what you know to make our life better in the moment now? Have you ever looked at your work in that sense?
Well, yeah, but see, when I start doing that, then I feel like I need to be a spokesperson for the dark side, because
good.
Because, you know, I don't know of anything that can be used exclusively for the good. And I think people are all too willing to consider the possibility of meditation for world peace, or the use of our minds for distant healing, things like that. But if all of that is possible, then we can do damage just as well as we can do good. And this, to me, is part of the payoff of trying to understand the role of psychic functioning in our lives. You know, if it's pervasive in the way that it could explain why some people are luckier than others, why some people are unluckier than others. And if you look at unlucky people, it could be that people are unlucky because their bad luck is a kind of external version of psychosomatic ailments. Just as people can make themselves ill, they might create bad luck for themselves. Or, an even more sinister possibility, is that other people could be doing it to them. And that's why I said the existence of psychic functioning brings us closer to this kind of magical worldview that we associate with metaphysical views in undeveloped countries. And that may be the way things really are. It may be that science has taken us away from both the good and the nasty part of life as it really is.
Possible. It's possible. And I'm going to come back to your subject. Just one more thing, just going into the infinite, shall I say. I always try to think to myself, is the universe really infinite? I mean, is it really? And if that is the case, my God, that's beyond my even understanding of what infinite... I mean, how the hell can I get infiniteness in my tiny brain? I can't even comprehend something going on and just never ending. And if there is no infinite, if there is an end... well, what's beyond the end? And I know we talk about all these theories of the Big Bang and everything else, but, you know, there really are some massive mysteries that we may never get the answer to. I mean, how are we ever going to travel to the infiniteness of the infinite? We're never going to, are we? Now, you know, in all of mankind's stretch of timelessness in the future, I mean, we're never going to really come to any true understanding, are we, of the reality that we're in? I mean, the only reality I have is I look up the sky and I see it's blue. I don't know there's a universe out there. I'm told there is by NASA. I've never been there.
Well, there are lots of things we have trouble really forming concepts of, you know, because to some extent our ability to do that is tied to our ability to picture things. So I think, you know, physics tells us that the universe has at least 4 dimensions. And that's very hard for us to picture too. You know, maybe we can't do that until we start developing toys that somehow illustrate properties of a four-dimensional space-time. So I don't know. I grant you that we may never really have a pictorial, concrete grasp of what it means for the universe to be infinite.
No, but it is so fascinating. Well, getting into infinitiveness right now with your work. Yes, I think channeling as well. Let's go there as well, because that's part of the psychic topics we're going to cover. Now, with the channeling experience, or some of the research you've done on that, there is some great information that comes through sometimes, isn't there?
Absolutely. The question, though, the big question, is where is it coming from? The problem is, you know, if a medium tells us, for example, that your Uncle Harry is here and he wants you to know that there's a secret will that he wrote and hid in a concealed place in his desk, and if you just look there, you'll find it. I mean, that sounds great. And if we discover that there actually was such a will, and by the way, there is a case like this,
yeah.
Does that tell us that Uncle Harry has survived? The answer is no. And the reason is that so long as we can confirm and verify information provided by a medium about the deceased, then that information was there all along to be accessed by ESP. So any verifiable information about the deceased is information that could equally be accessed through ESP. So that's why it's very hard to decide between a survivalist interpretation of channeling or mediumship and what we can call the living agent psychic functioning version of it.
It's strange, isn't it? You know, these people, it's strange in the sense that people who channel bring through wonderful information and said in such an elegant way when they are in that modality, and yet, you know, everyday sort of existence isn't that grandeur, yeah? And it may not be a separate voice coming through, it may be themselves channeling their higher selves or oversoul, yet there is, when they connect to that part of them, some wonderful, beautiful information. And it's like, well, was that there all the time, or are they tapping into the consciousness of the universe, or, you know, like the universal mind? Some may call it God, but I'm not going to use that word right now. But, you know, a universal supercomputer in a sense.
Here's where a knowledge of the history of hypnosis is very useful, because what we know from cases of dissociation and hypnosis is that people can do all sorts of really miraculous, dramatic, and moving and impressive things through hypnosis. There's a very interesting film made by a psychiatrist at Stanford, David Spiegel. The story is that a TV anchor woman in San Francisco said to him, you know, there are all these channels out here on the West Coast. Some of them have to be legitimate. And Spiegel said, show me anybody who's highly hypnotizable, and I can turn that person into a channel. And so she volunteered her cameraman, and Spiegel has a movie where he hypnotized the cameraman, but all of a sudden the cameraman's affect changed completely, and he started apparently channeling some intergalactic entity. And so he said things like, greetings, friends, my name is Zantac, or whatever it was. And he started spouting all these New Age platitudes. And it sounded great, but what it really showed was that he had various kinds of dramatic capability that in his ordinary waking state, he wasn't able to access. What we do know about hypnosis is that people can exhibit various kinds of remarkable abilities or creativity once they manage to bypass the ordinary resistances that they have to more creative, optimal functioning.
Well, that is true. We barely understand the mind, do we? As brain research goes, you know, how much do we really understand? I mean, your opinion? I mean, is it
very little?
Very little, right? You know, and going back to that self-awareness statement I made earlier on about looking in the mirror and knowing that I'm aware of my reflection, we don't know how that's created by the brain. We've not got a clue. We've got.
We don't even know it's created by the brain. It may just be mediated by the brain.
Well, that's right, exactly. So we've we've had this, you know, this such a powerful size to our brain that are probably so untapped in day-to-day living, you know, especially when watching you know, the X Factor or something like that, when I suppose we're not really using much of our brain there, but yeah, there is these greater parts of us. Now, is that, again, coming back to the idea that consciousness is within the brain or outside? Again, we're never going to answer this, but it is good to look at both sides when it comes to hypnosis, in that sense of being able to take someone down and they've, you know, as that cameraman, he was able to connect to, as he thought, alien consciousness. We only call it alien because it's outside of our world. It's a consciousness on another planet somewhere. And, you know, well, who's to say there's not life on other planets? I would say most definitely there is. And well, I would say...
But here's where the creativity of hypnosis and dissociation is very interesting. There was a famous 19th century case of mediumship in Switzerland. The medium's pseudonym was Helene Smith. And the psychologist Theodore Flournoy wrote a book, From India to the Planet Mars. And Helene Smith thought she was communicating mediumistically with residents of Mars.
That's right.
And of course she was not. But what she did in this dissociated state was to create an entire Martian language, both written and spoken. The language was thoroughly consistent, it was grammatically and semantically consistent, and it was a creative tour de force of her mind. But it was something she created only because she got out of herself in this way and was able to do something that she ordinarily would not have been able to do.
But then, I know the book you're talking about, actually, yeah. But then what if different realities in the same space, they may not appear in the same space as we see them with our eyes, but in that same space is occupied another reality, another universe, in a sense, and that she was able to tune into that other reality. So when we say these planets are devoid of life, well, what if in another reality, as like a radio tunes into different frequencies, it's packed with life? What about in the same space that I'm sat in right now, something else occupies it in a different frequency, and she was able to tune into that?
Well, that isn't what she was describing.
No, but when we say there's, in her book, when she, you know, when it's, you know, from India to the planet Mars, we know from our observations that the planet has no life on. But what if in another reality or some other multi-universe or some other dimension in that same space there is something happening that we can't observe right now?
Well, this will help you to understand why being a philosopher can be a living hell, because I have trouble even unpacking the idea. I know people say things like what you just said, but I don't think the universe is just a matter of existing at a certain set of frequencies. I think it's more concrete than that. And so I don't understand exactly what it is you're suggesting, although I have a kind of vague sense of what you're saying, but I can't really grab onto it. So I apologize for that. It's just flaunting my own limitations.
Well, no, I mean, look, I'm just looking at beyond our understanding, in the sense that, yes, there's nothing here right now as I wave my hand, but if there's another way to tune in to a different frequency or some other reality or multiverse that occupies the same space, there's something else, is there, as real and as solid as we are?
I have no trouble understanding the idea that there may be things of which we're sensorially unaware that we can nevertheless have access to. I think that's what ESP tells us, okay? But whether that's another universe, that's the part I don't get, the multiverse idea. I don't fully get it.
Well, it is a theory, isn't it? And some great physicists have theorized this idea, have they not?
Well, let me get something off my chest about physicists, okay?
Okay, go ahead.
People usually genuflect in the presence of physicists and think they have to be deeper than the rest of us, but there's no such thing as a purely empirical science. And what I've found about physicists is that they have no reservations on the whole about tackling some of the deepest philosophical problems without any real exposure to the issues in the way that a professional philosopher would have access to them. You know, if I were to write a paper on laser physics without advanced training in the field, people would regard me as presumptuous in the extreme. And on the other hand, physicists have no problem tackling and publishing their views on deep philosophical issues without comparable advanced training in those issues. So I think the pronouncements of physicists on this should be taken with a huge grain of salt. I don't disparage the interest physicists have in these deep issues. What I question is their competence to address them.
Yes, yes, and I suppose I like to consider the impossible sometimes, only because I've never been to the end of the universe. None of us will. I don't know what's out there, or if it's just like this, or whether the properties are so different and the understanding so different that it's a whole different set of science in a sense. And, you know, what we think we're so clever at right now actually is well, almost makes the impossible possible in a sense. But, you know, I suppose we're where we are, and we have the level of the science that we do right now. So, you know, there's not much that we can talk about, you know, in concreteness to go outside there. But I suppose that's the whole topic of this conversation, isn't it? In a sense that these subjects are not concrete, full stop, and we can soon go into the impossible very quickly with these subjects.
It's very hard to get a handle on them. Absolutely.
Other cases that you've touched upon as well, and I've seen this in documentaries, when you've talked about organ transplants with recipients of, for example, hearts and lungs sometimes as well, where they took on the characteristics of the donor. That's interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely. Those are some of the most interesting cases to me, suggesting survival. So, to take one case, there was a man who received a heart-lung transplant from a lesbian painter. And the man's girlfriend reported that after the surgery, his personality, her boyfriend's personality, changed radically. He started carrying a purse. He started showing interest in artworks which had never interested him before. And what I find fascinating about cases like this is that it suggests that the deceased continue in some sense. It's almost like a case of, instead of haunting, where the deceased would hang around a certain location or in a house or a certain house, these are cases where the deceased seem to hang around their still living vital bodily organs. And the cases that impress me the most are cases where the heart-lung recipients are children, because the children recipients are not polluted by various ideas about what's possible and what isn't possible. And there's one very interesting case of a child who received a heart-lung transplant. And the way he experienced it was that he experienced the deceased as hanging around him, and he sometimes would yield control to the deceased young boy, so that when he met the young boy's parents, he gave way to, I think his name was Jerry, and Jerry ran up to Jerry's parents and hugged them and nuzzled with them the way that he used to when he was still living. And so the heart-lung recipient would say, sometimes I'd just let Jerry take over. And I take that child's innocent description of this very seriously, because he may be closer to the truth of what's actually happening than older adult recipients who already have various ideas about how the world works.
So how do you explain that then?
Well, this to me is one of the more suggestive bodies of evidence suggesting that, in fact, there is a kind of survival of consciousness after bodily death. It, instead of lingering around a house, it could linger around one's still living bodily organs, vital bodily organs. It would be different from mediumistic communications, although that could also be regarded as a kind of possession. It would be different from a reincarnation scenario.
Yeah, of course. It's fascinating, isn't it? Absolutely fascinating. And is that an area that you'd like to do more research in?
Well, I lack the medical qualifications to do that, but I'd like to see more research done in that.
Okay, yeah.
And this is a relatively new body of evidence in the study of postmortem survival. And as technology makes heart-lung transplants more feasible, then I'd like to think that we'll see more cases like this if only physicians are willing to look for them.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's just incredible in the first place that they can transplant the organ and it's accepted by the body. But then when this phenomena occurs, it really it's out the box in a sense, isn't it?
Yes.
Absolutely. Now, just going back to Casey, because Edgar Casey keeps coming in my mind for a reason in this interview, and I think it's because all the readings that he did for people and the help that he gave to people with the medical readings that he did, and all those readings were all documented. They're all in the ARE files in their vaults. So there is proof in that sense that, you know, whatever was coming through him, and he didn't know these people from Adam, he was able to help them.
Well, there's no doubt that he was a hell of a psychic. What's interesting is that kind of phenomenon has been known since the days of Franz Anton Mesmer. Right. I mean, Mesmer discovered that when he magnetized his patients, they were able to diagnose ailments in others and also exhibit various kinds of clairvoyance, knowledge of distant facts. So this is a well-known phenomenon, and Casey is just one of the more spectacular examples of that. Of
course, of course. I think they're going to do a movie on Casey at some point as well. I think there is a potential. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, that one. I'd definitely go see that. Now, okay, let's cover fraud, because I think that's an important one as well. You know, there are good psychics and mediums out there. There really are. The genuine ones that really have the ability, want to help, you know, and then there's the fraud, and which, you know, I say to people, in any trade, building, electricians, whatever, you're going to get fraud, yeah? Any trade, whatever it may be. I think the issue with the psychics and those who commit fraud in the psychic arenas is because I suppose it's touching people's hearts in a sense, isn't it? Sensitive people have gone through a lot. I suppose that's why it does. But yes, there's fraud, but there are those. Would you not agree that do have particularly very clear and accurate abilities?
Absolutely, there are some great cases where appeals to fraud are quite preposterous. Both mental mediumship, cases like Mrs. Piper, physical mediumship like D.D. Hume and some others. Where it gets interesting is that there are cases of mixed mediumship. This is where sometimes there's fraud and sometimes there's not. And in the case of physical mediumship, where PK seems to be exhibited, one of the famous cases of mixed mediumship is that of Eusapia Palladino in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Oh, yeah.
And Eusapia even admitted that she would cheat if given the chance, but the best investigators simply didn't give her a chance. And you can understand why a medium might resort to trickery if the power isn't forthcoming and you don't want to disappoint paying customers. I've actually been examining a contemporary case in Germany of mixed mediumship. And although I believe some of this medium's phenomena are genuine, there's no doubt that he has cheated on some occasions. Not with me, as far as I can tell. But
isn't that difficult for you, though? Mixed mediumship, damn it. Where sometimes, if like you said, true what you say, if they're in front of a mass audience, they've got to deliver. Those people have paid their tickets. Not that that's right. I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying that's what happens. But like you say,
that's what they feel they need to do. I'm not sure they actually need to do that.
Yeah, that's what they feel they need to. Yeah, I'm with you on that. But yet, when you've got them on one-to-one or in another type of setting, something more genuine, more pure, more true is connecting with them, the true gift that they always did have, and that's coming through.
Yes, I mean, in some cases, like the case in Germany that I've been studying, I think the medium just succumbed too readily to the kind of adulation he was receiving from people just because he had some genuine abilities.
Oh, the ego, yeah.
Yep, ego got in the way.
Ego got in the way.
And greed.
And greed, yeah.
Because he's making a good living now.
Yeah, and I'm not against people with an ability to make a living. We've all got to make a living, but that damn ego, it will cause so many issues when it's sometimes.
Quite right.
Yeah. Electronic voice phenomena. What's your opinion on this?
I'm not impressed by it. I think some of it's interesting as possible examples of psychokinesis among the living. But many of the purported communications strike me as very similar to Rorschach tests, where people just hear what they want or impose their own patterns on the evidence. And to some extent, I think the people investigating these cases are as naive as the television ghost hunters who go into a location armed with all this fancy equipment. They get some readings on the equipment, and they think they're in contact with the spirit. And they forget that they could be influencing the equipment just as well as the spirit. And we know that people can influence machines. So
yeah, wouldn't it be crazy, right? If this, if the investigators like that, if it was their soul, right? If they've got one, which I do believe, but it's their soul that's actually coming through and actually influencing some of the readings in that sense.
Well, this is how we test for psychokinesis in the lab. We put people in front of a machine and we ask them to make it behave non-randomly, for example. So if we can do that, and there's plenty of evidence that people can affect machines of various kinds.
But obviously, yeah, sure. But obviously, they've walked into a place where there is activity. The family is not enjoying what's going on, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have, gone to that resort to get them in or allowed them in to investigate. So there is something happening in the house. But even that something happening in the house, I suppose what you're saying could be the people in the house that are causing it.
Right on.
Right, just as the investigator calls it as he comes to investigate. Well, with the EVP, sort of summing that up, yeah, I've not been fully, I've not fully appreciated some of the research that some people have shown in that field. Some are quite good, yes, but some, well, you just can't tell others that they're not very good because their ego is so massive that everything, it just gets in the way. Do you know what I mean? They become non-communicative then in the sense of having a debate like this or a chat like this. Moving on from that in a sense, I had someone on recently that was a remote viewer. He was the guy that was the character taken off the film Men Who Stare at Ghosts. And, sorry?
Who did you have?
Lynn, I can't remember his name.
Lynn Buchanan.
Sorry, Lynn Buchanan. It was Lynn Buchanan. Really, really nice guy. Bloody interesting. Wow. What the government has been up to and potentially other governments and ours is still up to, and the effectiveness of it as well. Otherwise the military would not have even been interested in it one bit. The results that came from it, this ability to spy on people, and the people using a controlled remote view, not just remote view, but CRV, where you don't know, nor do the dogs know in guarded facilities that there's someone that's potentially viewing it from that, using that energy, and how they're able to, what they call, go to the subconscious, ask it any question, and bring that question in controlled into whatever's being asked of them to do. And it seems to have proven to work.
Yes. And again, that's another illustration which, if you really take it seriously, it again suggests this kind of connectedness of all minds, which is part of this primitive world, so-called primitive worldview, that modern science would really be more comfortable getting us away from, but which I think may be closer to the truth.
What's your, have you met any remote viewers or controlled remote viewers?
Sure. I used to be good friends with the late Hella Hammett, for example, who was one of Stargate's primary viewers.
Yeah, and they talk about as well remote viewing, ET civilizations as well, and they've been able to do that, and apparently there's a lot more out there than we understand.
Well, I've heard some reports I'm not so sure about, but I know some people have made those claims about ETs.
Yeah, and it's only as good as the person that you believe sometimes, or what you feel is right coming from people, because I think that goes for anyone that's got a psychic ability. I would say, and you can disagree with me, please do, that when you do this, genuinely do this for the right reasons, and I suppose they are just because, without no ego, let's put it that way, that it's a lot of trust to trust what's coming through, because, you are a filter. no matter what. The mind is a massive, is the filter as well, and the ego, and you know, all sorts of, you know, we have emotions, they are massive filters. So it's a lot of trust to, you know, trust what's coming through. So I think sometimes when the psychics are a little bit off, maybe it's just because, you know, how trusting of the information coming through are they, and that takes a lifetime to build sometimes.
It's not just a matter of trust. I'd say it's also a certain amount of faith that what you experience as being the case is really the case. I mean, you know,
Yes.
we can't always be sure that our imaginations aren't providing a lot of the material. It's very hard to know.
It is, and yes, absolutely, that included as well, you know, because if you're doing it for the right reasons, again, you won't want to give misleading information to someone because you care enough that you don't want to put them down that path. So there is also that trust is, my God, what the hell does this mean? You know, should I tell her that? Yeah, I think, let's just say this for the psychics that are out there as well. I don't think it's easy.
No.
If you've got that ability.
No, it's difficult to do it properly, and it's difficult to do it responsibly.
Yeah, so, you know, some of these psychics that just come on the scene after no training, shall I say, as well. I don't like that neither, where they've not time served at all, and they've just, you know, they want the fame in a sense, don't they, some of them?
It's an ability, and it needs to be handled very carefully and perfected.
Yes, absolutely, it does, absolutely. Now, one of the big subjects on YouTube right now is out-of-body experiences. It seems to be a lot of people's road into these subjects sometimes. I don't know why, but it's very, very popular right now. What's been your experience of out-of-body?
Well, I haven't had them since I was a kid, but again, one of the problems maybe of being a philosopher. What interests me about out-of-body experiences is that I think you have to be very careful about assuming that you've really left your body. For all we know, it could be one very vivid way that people experience clairvoyance. You know, some of us are very good at imagery, mental imagery. Others, not so much. And we know that people can give detailed, correct readings of the contents of sealed envelopes, or the middle card in a deck of cards. And they can't literally leave their body and go there because there is no there for them to be. So if people can clairvoyantly give information accessible at no location that they could possibly visit, even out of their body, I think we have to be very careful about assuming that when they bring back information from locations where they could have traveled to, that they've actually traveled there. It may just be imagery-rich clairvoyance.
Yeah, but where is that coming from? How are they even able to tap into that, and what does it mean? I know it's so easy to just to sort of, well, push it to one side, but I mean, there is something there, surely.
Well, sure, there's the clairvoyant or ESP ability, and I think that's undeniable. So what I would like to see happen more often in parapsychology is to have researchers try to understand how psychic abilities are functioning in day-to-day life. You know, you can bring it into the laboratory, but once you do that, you're studying it under psychologically straitjacketed conditions. You know, it's like trying to study athletic abilities or sensuality in the lab. And you can't really do that. There are certain things you can study only in real-life contexts. And until we have some idea what psychic functioning is doing in everyday life, we have no idea what we're trying to bring into the lab and how appropriate or inappropriate that activity might be.
Where is parapsychology nowadays, and for those wanting to study it as well?
To some extent, I think it's still too mired in the experimental method. And I still think, to a great extent, studying psychic abilities in the lab is methodologically premature. Because, as I said, for all we know, it might be as inappropriate as trying to study the ability to play tennis in the lab. You can't do it. You have to really study tennis players working against opponents trying their hardest to win, and in the actual game conditions in which their ability is manifest. Some people play better than they practice, some practice better than they play, and so on.
What's the overall, you know, doing all these years of being immersed in these subjects, you seem a very open kind of guy, to be honest with you. I suppose maybe you have to be, and I suppose would you encourage that to others studying in this field?
Only if you're professionally secure. You know, I think I did the right thing by waiting until I got tenure to stick my neck out professionally and write about parapsychological topics, because I've taken a lot of abuse for it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very risky thing to do at the beginning of an academic career, if we're speaking now to academics, because
Sure.
it's all too easy to accuse people who are doing it early in their careers of not being able to cut it doing mainstream work, and that they're going into this very soft area where there aren't clear standards.
Okay. No, yeah, well, that's good advice, though, just for anyone wanting to get in it. But do you think that would you hope that would change in future generations?
Well, you're now speaking to a jaded philosopher at the end of his career, you know. Sure, I hope it would change. Do I think it's going to change? Not unless humankind undergoes some major transformation that doesn't seem to be on the brink of doing.
Just one final, thank you for sharing that, by the way. Just one final subject as well. Telepathy. Have you researched that at all?
Sure. It's a very hard thing to study because it's very difficult to distinguish evidence for telepathy from evidence for clairvoyance. So, you know, some of the early tests at mental suggestion, as they used to call it, they had a so-called sender in one room and a receiver in the other. And the receivers were getting correct information about what the sender was looking at. But it could equally be explained in terms of the receiver's ability to read the target rather than the mind of the sender. And the problem is, so long as you're conducting real scientific experiments in telepathy, you have to write down the results. And if you're writing down the results, then any results can be explained in terms of clairvoyance, precognitive clairvoyance of what was later written down about the results. So methodologically, there's no such thing as a pure telepathy experiment. You can't do it. So I believe telepathy exists. I believe it manifests sometimes in various kinds of apparitional experiences. But to study it precisely is just one of the methodological challenges facing parapsychologists.
No, absolutely. Well, this whole field is very challenging, I'm guessing, you know, in general, for yourself, for parapsychologists. Well, what would you say then, Stephen, is, well, a sort of important message to the audience, but if you can do that, but also really a conclusion to all these wonderful years that you've put into this work as well, and where you are now with your understanding?
I'd say the world is much more interesting than we're often told that it is. Could be much more beautiful than we're often told it is. Could be much more dangerous than we're often told that it is. And to take very cautiously the claims of psychics. No matter how sincere they might still be confused about what they do. And in the words of Patience Worth, have faith in men, but keep thine eyes slitted.
Yeah, that's so important. Keep an open mind, absolutely. And I'm all for that as well. So I would just like to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a complete pleasure.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on The More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.